Business models, innovation. Value propositions. It's the stuff of life if you are a startup or if you're a large organization focused on innovation and trying to figure out new ways to evolve your business, especially in this world that's becoming increasingly digital. And today on episode number 112 of CXOTalk, we are thrilled to welcome Alex Osterwalder, who, in my mind, is the business model king of the world. And I'm Michael Krigsman, and I'm here with my co-host, Vala Afshar. Hey, Vala.
Michael, how are you?
I am excellent.
I agree with you 1,000%. We're honored to have truly an innovation and business model, world-renowned expert, best-selling author, Alex, on our show. Welcome, Alex.
My pleasure to be with you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
So today we are trying a new type of CXOTalk format, which is we're going to ask Alex a series of questions, and Vala and I are pretty much going to be quiet for most of this, which I know, Vala, for you and I, that's tough.
Especially for, one of us.
All right, we're going to have to talk about this later. So Vala and I are going to pretty much be quiet for most of this, and we're then going to take Alex's answers and create short videos. So Alex, you're as the business model king, you do a lot of experiments, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can't innovate without experimenting, so it's part of the job.
All right, and so now we're going to do an experiment in CXOTalk Media. How's that?
Sounds great.
Okay. So Vala, do you want to kick it off with the questions?
Well, before we start, Alex, if you don't mind, briefly give us a little bit about your background, and of course, you're CEO of Strategyzer. Talk to us about Strategyzer and your focus in terms of what you consult.
So, basically, I guess I'm best known for being the lead author of Business Model Generation, this book about business models around this approach called the Business Model Canvas that helps new ventures and large companies think about business models and reinvent themselves. And based on that book and that methodology, we started a software company that helps companies reinvent themselves. So our kind of vision of this is that we want to create the SAP of strategy, if you want. We have tools, software for operations. I think we do that pretty well in the world. But when it comes to strategy and innovation, I think we can get a lot better in terms of the tools, processes, and supporting software that we use. And that's kind of where we're trying to go, my team and myself. And it's an exciting journey because I think it's a very relevant topic, business model innovation, new value propositions, because business models expire like a yogurt on the fridge, they like to say. It's a competitive world out there, so there is no stopping anymore. Everybody has to reinvent themselves.
And you've written a book called Value Proposition Design as an extension to business model generation and the business model canvas. And Value Proposition Design really talks about product market fit. But between the two books, between the business model canvas tool that you developed in your first book and Value Proposition Design, your work is underlying much of what's going on today in the business world regarding business models and business model change.
Yeah, we learned a lot since we published the first book, and I think one of the big learnings is, and we believed in that for quite some time now, is if you want to seriously reinvent yourself, you need to have the best tools, best in class. And that's a series of tools. There's no one thinker that can give you all the tools. So what we try to do with our first two books and by using books by other thinkers and practitioners, we try to integrate all these methodologies and make it practical for people in companies, for people starting new ventures to apply this stuff. So I think that the real vision behind this is, well, what if we had a toolbox and we just took the best tools out there independently of who made them? Is it a consulting firm? Is it a Harvard Business School professor? Is it our company? We really want to help companies innovate with the best tools. And those two books that we brought out address two topics that we think are top of the list of executives, which is business models and value propositions. but I think there will be many more tools coming from many more people.
Great. Alex, let's start by you defining what is a business model.
There's a very simple answer to the question of what a business model is. I'd say it's the blueprint of your strategy. So the strategy tells you where you want to go, and the business model tells you how you're going to do that. And it's basically a description. We like to make it a visual description of how you create, deliver, and capture value.
What are the components of a business model?
So we created the business model canvas, a very pragmatic and visual business tool that allows you to address the 9 important questions to describe a business model. With that, starts with the customer segment. Who are you targeting? And then you ask yourself, well, what kind of value am I creating for them? So you're going to describe the value propositions. Then you ask, well, how am I reaching this market? You're going to describe the channels to reach those customers. Once you're in business with them, next block is, well, what kind of relationship am I going to establish? Is it transactional? Is it long-term? Then, of course, when you know who you're targeting, what you're delivering, and how you're delivering it, you need to ask, well, what are these customers willing to pay for? So you're going to talk about the revenue streams. We like to call these first 4 or 5 components the front stage of how you're creating value. Then comes the backstage. You got to ask yourself, okay, I know who I'm targeting, what I'm delivering. How am I going to do it? So you talk about the key resources, assets, factories, brand, and so on. How are you going to do it? And of course, key partners. Who are you going to work with to do that? And that basically gives you the cost structure. So at the end, if you answer these 9 questions, you have the equation of how you're going to earn more money than you're spending. You're going to describe all the essential pieces to the blueprint of your strategy.
Alex, why are business models so important?
Well, business models are per se not something new. Any organization that created some kind of structure, created some value, and delivered that value has a business model. The reason why business models as a topic has become so relevant these days is because business models expire much faster. 20 years ago, you could say, I'm in this industry, I'm in the airline industry, and everybody would know what you're doing. Today, you tell somebody what industry you're in, they won't know what your business looks like. Well, how does your business model work? So let's take the music industry. Apple was one company that started disrupting that. Then came Spotify. Then you have the record majors that are trying to figure out how to do things. So business models today expire much faster than ever before. And in one particular industry, you'll find multiple different business models. So understanding what's the right business model for my industry, for my area, is increasingly important. And maybe just one more thing is that today, if you ask, what business is Apple in? You can't name an industry. They're in software, they're in hardware, they're in content. Basically, it's the business model that matters, not the industry anymore. It's what's the blueprint of your strategy. That's why business models start to matter, because there are many more choices than ever before.
What is the business model canvas, and why did you develop it?
So the business model canvas is our way of visually representing business models with 9 questions, 9 building blocks. And the reason we came up with this together with Yves Pigneur a long time ago in a PhD dissertation was we wanted to figure out shared language, practical language that executives and entrepreneurs could use to describe their business model. And this was the result, and it's now tested with millions, literally millions of people. And it helps them a lot to describe their business models, to collaborate on creating business models, and to test business models.
Alex, how should one use the business model canvas?
I think there's no one right way to use it, and we just did recently a blog post on 14 ways to use the business model canvas. Because it's such a broad tool that allows you to think about your business model, you can use it to manage your existing business model. You can use it to create new business models. You can use it as a dashboard. So there are many different ways, and we do now know how in particular areas how you can use it, but overall you can use it in very many areas because any organization has a business model, so you can, every kind of function you have in a business will have to deal with the business model in one way or another.
What is business model innovation, and why is it important?
Business model innovation is about reinventing yourself or rejuvenating your business model. And The reason it's important today is because many of the legacy business models expired. And it's not just in technology. Take the pharmaceutical industry. Their business model of selling blockbuster drugs doesn't work anymore, so they need to reinvent themselves. And the reason why it's important today is because so many industries are facing this challenge. And the reason why we really push this topic of business models is because technology innovation, great new products, just not enough anymore. That just gives you the ticket to compete. What you really want is a great product, great technology, great value proposition embedded in a powerful business model. It's that combination that will give you, at least for some time, a competitive advantage.
Can you describe to us the relationship between innovation and business model change?
Innovation is a very broad topic. You can have process innovation, you can have product innovation, technology innovation. It's a very broad term. Business model innovation is one particular type of innovation, which is, well, how am I creating, delivering, and capturing value? So it's at a very strategic level, and it's so hard to do because it can, be a fundamental change for an existing company. If you're a pharmaceutical company that has done the same, worked the same way for decades, it's very hard to change the entire business. And same in industry, IT, consumer goods, you have to change or maybe add a new kind of DNA to what you've been doing for the last decades. That's very hard to do.
What do startups need to know about business models?
I think startups or large companies, any company that's trying to build something new, the main thing here is to always admit that when you start out, uncertainty is at its maximum. You don't know what's going to work, in particular when you're trying something radically new. And you need to admit that, which means you're not going to execute an idea, you're actually going to search for the right business models and the right value propositions to bring that idea to market, to turn that vision of what you think could be done into a strategic, concrete blueprint. So you need to admit you have no clue when you start out, but you systematically reduce this uncertainty with small experiments, and you increase the money you spend on experiments, tests, prototypes, until you have enough evidence to understand this is going to work, and then you invest heavily. But you don't invest heavily at the beginning, which sounds, like obvious, but many companies still invest in ideas. Ideas don't matter. It's turning that idea into concrete value propositions and business models that you can prove with evidence that they're going to work. That's the hard part, and then you execute it. So ideas really don't matter alone.
What do large companies need to know about business model change?
What large companies really need to realize when they address this topic of business model change, business model innovation, is that it's not bad to have an existing business that makes money and might be at the end of its life cycle, but you want to continue to execute that. What they need to do is create an innovation space, which is in addition to what they already have. And in that space, the rules are totally different. So what they need to realize is that incentives are different, processes are different, the type of people you're going to need are different. So you need to create that second space to be able to innovate. And here's the hard part. That second culture, that second space needs to be deeply integrated with the execution space, the execution engine, as some like to call it. It needs to be a partnership. You need to have a dual culture that works hand in hand. That's very tough to do.
What are some advice that you have for large companies who want to conduct business model innovation and therefore are operating essentially two different business models under one roof at the same time?
Yeah, I think even before they get there, the challenge is, well, how do you get new businesses with potentially different business models, not necessarily, how do you give them space to grow? Well, you want to give entrepreneurship some prestige and power in your company. And that is not the case today, and there's a very simple reason. What gives you prestige in a large company? It's the budget that you manage, and it's the number of people that you manage. Yet an entrepreneur, an innovator, a business model innovator should never start with a huge team and a huge budget, because you will waste the money, you'll blow it. You want to start small and increase that, but it means you need to give your innovators really a seat at the top table. And I like to be very provocative and say, hey, what if we created the chief corporate entrepreneur who has just as much power as the CEO and he or she reports to the board? You're creating a space where people can innovate with real power to create the future for the company.
Alex, I want to ask you a question about what we can argue has become maybe the top buzzword in the tech industry, and that is digital transformation. What is digital transformation?
Well, probably there's as many definitions of that as people. I'd like to look at it as, well, how are we going to use the new technologies today that exist to create better value propositions and better business models, and not just focus on the digital aspect, but focus on the value propositions that we create, focus on the business models that create value for the company, and using all the technologies and communication needs out there, which usually is probably going to be a mix between old school and new school, right? Between the physical world and the digital world. The big challenge, if I just take my space that I focus on in digital transformation, is, well, how can we use digital technologies to create better value propositions that address jobs, pains, and gains that matter to customers? And how do we embed those value propositions in business models that allow my company to create value for my company, for the shareholders, for the employees, and create a certain competitive advantage? So digital transformation is a combination of innovation, value proposition, innovation in business models, innovation in processes. It's the whole aspect of transforming, and on the basis of digital tools that exist today.
I'd like to come back to digital transformation in a moment, but first, let's just for a second pick up that thread on corporate innovation. And what advice do you have for large companies that want to work with startups, to use startups as an external source of innovation for themselves?
Probably not an area that I have that much expertise in, because what I've seen very often is that large companies kind of use startups and almost suck the life out of them because they require a lot of time, a lot of energy, and then sometimes don't even help the startup to survive. So I think just some of the important things that need to be done in this space when you work with startups is understand that their kind of ambitions, their goals are very different from you as a large company, and adapt the way you collaborate with the way they need to survive in the market. So you need to really build a partnership in the sense that, hey, respect that this is a company that might work with us, might not work with us, but we can't take too much of their bandwidth. Or if we do that, we need to actually, really finance them in a deep and substantial way. What I think is important to understand is it is one of the options of innovating to work with startups. You can build, you can help build, you can acquire. There's a whole panoply of things that you can do. One thing that is very important is to understand the culture of a startup, of moving extremely fast, changing very fast. So if 1 week they say they're going to do this, next week they might have to move in another direction because the market tells them they were wrong a week ago. That's very hard for large companies to understand. This is much more speed. It's unpredictable, and when it's uncertain, you're probably going to change very quickly a lot until you have the evidence of which direction you need to go. So you need to develop the mindset of collaborating with a startup. Again, it's a very big cultural difference from the execution engines that we have in large companies today.
Alex, going back to the topic of digital transformation, why does transformation, digital or otherwise, often require business model change?
Because a lot of the things that are possible today require very different processes, very different ways of working. You can do things today that you couldn't do maybe 5 years or a decade ago. And in large organizations, you try to make standardized, industrialized processes. And that's very good. They're supposed to be rigid to a certain point because you know what works. You want to make that leaner, faster, better, and cut the costs out of it. The problem is, when the world changes and new choices become possible, you might have to think of creating totally new processes to create new types of value propositions. And change doesn't come easily to anybody, right? So the difficulty is, in addition to this execution engine that you built, which is very good, you need to be lean and cut costs to produce efficiently. In addition to that, you need to open up to say, okay, well, some things are new, some things are different. What if we experimented in that space? And experimentation is never lean. Experimentation always requires a culture where you can fail, where failure is a good thing because you're going to learn and you're going to change. So again, it comes back to these two different cultures. That's why it's so hard, because when you do new things, you need to experiment. When you create new processes, it might be very different from what you've done before, and those processes are in process handbooks, right? Those are almost cast in stone.
You mentioned the term value proposition. What is a value proposition?
Basically, the value proposition is the story of how you're addressing jobs, pains, and gains that matter to customers. Your value proposition describes how your products and services, or how you intend to create value for your customer with your products and services. It's never your products and services alone. It's how they address things that matter to your customers. So it's the story of how you're helping your customers succeed.
What is the difference between value proposition and a business model?
So the business model is the big picture. The business model describes how you're creating value for your company, right? Because the business model helps you describe, what's the strategic blueprint to create a profit for your company. The value proposition has a very different focus. It describes how you're creating value for your customer. And a company that wants to succeed needs to succeed in both. In that detailed picture, focused on the customer, how am I creating value for my customer? And in the bigger picture of how is that value proposition going to be embedded in a business model that creates value for me. Now, some people like to say, well, the value proposition is the most important. Well, I wouldn't say so, because there are multiple examples out there where companies had great value propositions and still went bankrupt. Kodak invented or helped invent the digital camera. People love digital cameras. Didn't prevent Kodak from going bankrupt. Why? Because they didn't have a business model for digital cameras. So you need to succeed in both. How you're creating value for your customer and how you're creating value for your business. Seems obvious, but what's different today is that we have tools to reflect on those two things.
What is product market fit?
Product market fit is basically when you get traction with your value proposition. So you might have something great on paper that you came up with in your meeting room. Looks like a brilliant idea because your best marketers, your best engineers, came up with it, and it just seems obvious that this is going to work. But that's just a concept. That's just a prototype of how you intend to create value. Then you go out and test it, and you're probably going to be wrong because nobody knows customers as much as customers know themselves. So basically, when you go start and test these things, you'll be wrong at the beginning, and you'll change your value proposition until customers get excited, until you nailed it. And when you got it right, that's when your value proposition gets traction. And when your value proposition gets traction, that's when you have product market fit. So it's basically this journey from taking an idea, conceptualizing it in a value proposition, testing it until I have the right fit between my products and services and the jobs, pains, and gains that my customers have.
Can you talk to us a little bit about value proposition canvas and how that works?
So the value proposition canvas is a zoom in into two blocks of the business model canvas. It takes the customers and it takes your value proposition. And why two pieces? Well, basically, you want to understand your customer, right? So what if we had a map to describe our customers? So we came up with this customer profile, very simple map with 3 components to better describe, understand, study customers, map customers in an actionable way. So the 3 components: the jobs they're trying to get done, the tasks they're trying to fulfill, then the pains that they have, anything that annoys them, that holds them back from doing a job well, and the gains that they're trying to get, to materialize. So when you can describe the jobs, pains, and gains of your customers, that's when you start really understanding them in a very actionable way. Then you ask yourself, okay, what are my bundles of services, products and services that I want to offer? Okay, that's pretty easy to do. So we're looking at the value proposition. But then what you really want to do is make explicit how your products and services address some of those jobs, pains, and gains. So how do my products and services help alleviate my customers' pains? That's what we call pain relievers. And then how do my products and services help my customers materialize on some of those gains that they aim to achieve, right? So when you have this map to describe your customer and to describe how your products and services are creating value, that's when you can have, you can shape your ideas, you can have great conversations, and you can track also that understanding. So we, again, like with the Business Small Canvas, created a map to make this topic that was really fuzzy more tangible. When you ask somebody what's a value proposition, you'll get 20 answers. But if you have a map to describe value propositions, you created a shared language. That was our goal. What's the map to describe value propositions with a shared language so we can better design, challenge, test, and then build value propositions?
What are the steps to creating a new value proposition?
So the steps to creating a new value proposition and the steps to creating a new business model are very similar. The first, well, basically, it's the journey of going from idea to a real business, something tangible, right? So you first design some conceptual prototypes. How could my value proposition look like? So this whole idea of prototyping, looking at alternatives, asking what could be. Then the next step is immediately, how do I test my value proposition? So on paper it looks great. Now let me test it with the market, because customers are ultimately your judge, jury, and executioner, so you immediately want to test. You test it, you're going to learn that you were wrong, you go back to designing it. It's an iterative process. And you go through this iterative process until you have enough evidence that you're going to succeed. Now the only difference between creating great value propositions and bringing them to market and creating great business models and bringing them to market is when you're focusing on the value proposition, you probably have an additional task of getting the business model right. So there's one never works without the other. You need to embed great value propositions in a great business model.
How can you pivot business models and value propositions quickly to find the right approach?
I think it's a very interesting question of how you pivot value propositions. And people often think that they need to build something. If they're thinking of an IT service, they need to build the IT service. Well, that's absolutely not true. That comes maybe in a later stage, because building stuff in the software world, is cheaper than ever before, but it still costs you quite a bit of money. So the first thing you want to do is just conceptually map it out, and then ask yourself, what needs to be true for my idea to work? And those are your hypotheses. So you ask yourself, what are all the things that need to be true for my idea to work after you kind of mapped out your value proposition that you want to build? And then you test one after the other, and that could be as simple as launching a Google ad campaign. You didn't build anything yet, you're just figuring out if people will click on an ad, about a new type of this or that, a new headache pill, or you will launch a Google ad around a specific problem, and you will learn if people have that problem or not. If nobody clicks on an ad, well, that problem probably doesn't exist. So you can test a lot of things and pivot your idea way before you build anything. So there's this myth around having to build something to test it. In particular, in the health sector, people will tell you, but it's very expensive to build a prototype. In biotech, it's very expensive to come up with something new. But you can pivot a lot before. You can test ideas a lot before. You just need to always address this question: what's the most important thing that needs to be true for my idea to work? And that's the first thing you will test. And then you'll continue testing those important hypotheses.
Can people in large companies test and pivot business models and value propositions?
For sure. I mean, startup or large company, the task is the same thing. You want to reduce uncertainty. You want to de-risk innovation. So you have to do it if you don't want to make what some academics like to call wild-ass gambles on new innovations. The challenge, of course, in large companies is that you have rigid processes that were not designed for experimentation. So it's much harder to do these kind of experiments because the processes don't exist, the incentives don't exist to experiment, fail, and learn. So you have to put that in place. But I can tell you that we're seeing this, in many, many companies. Colgate is doing it. GE even launched a whole program called FastWorks together with Eric Ries to do this. Steve Blank has worked also with at GE. So large companies are trying to do this now. It's very tough for them to get these processes going, but they know that if they don't do it, for them innovation will remain extremely risky, and they will basically burn a pile of cash. So if they want to reduce the risk of innovation, they need to do the same thing as startups do today, which is experiment, learn, and pivot or iterate very quickly. And they're trying very hard. I know a lot of companies that are doing that now.
I think you may have answered this question, but how can large companies use startups as an external source of innovation?
So sometimes there are things that you can't do internally because of the culture, because of the processes, or because of the brand, for example. So I do think it does make sense for large companies to sometimes say, well, what if we used an external entity and gave them the entire freedom, we invest maybe in them, and then potentially we acquire them. The one problem with that approach is that the startup might lose some of the things that the large company could normally offer, which is brand, which is access to its sales force. So working with startups is really good if you can also help them benefit from some of the assets that you have, and I don't just mean money, I mean sales force, I mean brand, I mean IP, and so on. So turning it into more of a partnership where you can give them some of your strength to leverage where they're starting out, that's when you get the best kind of results.
Alex, we have a question from Twitter regarding value proposition, and the question is value proposition design down the chain or up the chain?
So it really depends on the objective that you have. I mean, it's very legitimate to say, I'm just going to focus on value propositions within my existing business model. So if you're a company that had to invest billions into a platform infrastructure, well, you're probably going to want to increase the return on that investment and say, what are other value propositions that I could create based on that existing platform? Now, it can also be very different where that your business model today has expired and you're going to create you need to look for entirely new business models. So where value propositions, have the right to be embedded in totally different business models. So it really depends on the objective where such an innovation project is going to live within the company. You can improve your existing business model with new value propositions, or you can build new value propositions that require totally different business models. But see, those two things will require a very different environment. Because if you're starting to question the business model, you're playing a different ballgame. You need to create a space where you're allowed to question the business model. So depending on what the objective is, you will find value proposition design in one part of the company or another.
Alex, last week we had Tim O'Reilly, who's as you know, CEO of O'Reilly Media, and he's a basketball fan like yourself. And he said at one time, the team with the best players win, and analogous to today, companies with the most data win. You talk about a company like Uber. Was their business model built around transportation, or are they a data company? And today at 50 billion valuation, they're richer than 80% of the S&P 500. So talk to us about this massive acceleration and innovation in the mobile, social, cloud, big data, Internet of Things, and how that can radically change your business model.
So I think there are many different amazing trends going on. There are many different technology innovations that you can use to create entirely new business models. And I think what we've seen in the recent years, which led to some of these crazy valuations, you can discuss if they're too big or not, but is the scalability of these companies. So if we take Uber as an example, I mean, what's amazing is they have relatively little physical assets. Take a taxi company as a comparison, the business model is night and day, right? They actually get others to do the work in their business model, and they use other companies or other people's assets. So what that business model does is it intelligently leverages the work of others and the assets of others. So some of these business models that have huge valuations do that really well. Take Facebook. Why is Facebook so valuable? Well, because they have changing content every day. People don't come to Facebook for the platform. They come for the content of their so-called friends. But who creates that content? Well, it's a free workforce of over 1.4 billion people today, I think, right? So again, it's a business model that leverages other people's work, other people's assets, and does that extremely well. So that will then obviously also lead to a huge pool of data, but the content itself is very valuable. Not just how people navigate and behave so you can sell advertising, but the content itself that was created for free is a huge part of the business model. So what these companies do is they're very, very scalable. I know I get along with my answers. I'm excited about this stuff, so I'll try to keep them shorter.
Awesome. No, it's great. No, it's great. We've asked the questions that we wanted to for our special lightning round, and now we're just chit-chatting business models. And I have a question. I have a question for you regarding, so you said Facebook is relying on this pool of free labor, and you said that Uber is making money, but it doesn't own all of the vehicles. Do we need to consider the issue of fairness in this? Does that come into play?
Well, I wouldn't say so in the sense that consumers and users always have a choice. So, of course, we can always discuss about ethics and fairness, and I know Uber in particular has been in the discussion all the time. But, at the end of the day, it's consumer behavior that decides if a business is going to work or not. So if consumers are fine with the service and they say, you know what, I don't care if my data is used here or there, it's their choice. Where I do think, we need to talk about fairness and ethics is when a company is not transparent about how they're doing certain things.
Sure.
And I think that's harder and harder to do in today's world because, information flows so quickly. So it's actually, the fairness today is happening by consumers voting with their feet and consumers distributing information about companies that behave badly. Apple probably wouldn't have changed their logistics if consumers hadn't started to say, hey, this is not fair to workers in Asia. So it is, I think, at the end of the day today really the consumer that decides, and even when customers get locked in, they can always leave. It's always a consumer choice. So I do think the fairness comes from how the consumers decide what's fair and what isn't.
Sure. Well, you know, watching the CEO of Airbnb at CodeCon, Recode's conference yesterday, he talked about they're approaching 1 million visitors a day. They don't own any real estate. YouTube doesn't own video. Alibaba doesn't have, you know, logistics supply chain. Uber doesn't own taxis. Facebook doesn't own any content. You're right. Owning physical assets, and these are some of the largest, fastest growing companies in the world, really speaks to business model innovation. That's unprecedented. Uber couldn't exist 10 years ago. It's that smart device, mobile, social capability that has this company again valued at nearly $50 billion, which is just stunning.
But so just to build on that, I would still also, you know, not neglect the companies that do have assets. I mean, the biggest and most successful company in the world, you know, is Apple today, and they're not this kind of just digital platform. It's one component of what they do, but they do have a lot of physical assets and a lot of workers around the world, and that's not likely to change. They're not going to move towards, you know, a much lighter and more scalable maybe model. So I think, you know, while we're focusing on that a lot because it's so new, we will. I think it's always dangerous to say, you know, there's this type of business model that's right or wrong. Innovation will always give you new models in spaces where you would have never expected them. And that could be, you know, asset heavy or asset light. The challenge is always to, you know, to question the fundamental assumptions and say, okay, well, these companies have done it that way. What if we actually did own the assets? You know, who knows? You know, you have to think that way. You always have to be ready to question the fundamental assumptions rather than, you know, doing what others have done. So it's great that you have fast followers that all want to be like Uber, and Uberization is a big topic. But I think the greatest innovators are those that simply ask, what's the right way to do this? And then they just use others as inspiration rather than something that they will copy. So while I'm fascinated by these scalable business models, I do think it's always kind of dangerous to fall in love with one kind of trend, and we always need to consider that, you know, it's about figuring out the right business model for the right context.
Well, there is this psychological dimension that we are fascinated by these startups. Although, you know, I have to say the idea of a startup being valued at $10 billion or whatever, and still thinking and employing 1,000 people or whatever the number is or more, and still thinking of it as a startup it seems a little bit of a stretch to me. But there's this psychological element of the underdog and the fact that it's new and the fact that it's such a stark contrast. You know, Airbnb having so little property assets compared to its valuation compared to a large established hotel chain, which has physical assets that we all know and we can see. So there is this psychological element which is really comes into play here as well.
I think, you know, building on that idea of the psychological element, I think there's a general danger at the moment that these companies are so highly valued and so hyped, it almost leads to, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to do the same thing and be the same way, and young entrepreneurs start to think that if they build a $50 or $100 million business, you know, that is worth maybe, or, you know, makes revenues 50, 100 million, or is worth 50 or 100 million, they haven't achieved something. So I think these crazy numbers are also a danger because, you know, they kind of make people who don't get that far look like complete losers, which is obviously not the case because building any type of business is extremely hard. And I think that sometimes gets lost when the press, you know, kind of pushes these crazy, amazing, fascinating stories. But it does have, I think, an impact on entrepreneurship in general, and that's dangerous. So I think we should kind of push against that a little bit as well.
Yeah, when there's a chilling effect that makes entrepreneurs who are starting more modest companies than Uber or Airbnb have self-doubt, that's obviously not a positive thing.
I think it's also that, you know, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator in a large company, you need to figure out what's right for you. Um, it can be perfectly fine to build a $5 million lifestyle business or $10 million lifestyle business, because moving towards $100 million in revenues, $1 billion in revenues, does have a big consequence on your lifestyle. So you need to, I think, always as an innovator, as a business person, figure out what is it that you are passionate about, what is fun. If you're an executor, don't become an innovator. If you are uncomfortable with uncertainty, don't innovate or become an entrepreneur. It's going to kill you, right? And on the other hand, if you are in a large company and you really are an entrepreneurial spirit and an innovator, you're in a large company that doesn't have a space for that to exist, then leave and build your own company, or find a company that gives you that space. I think all of this is at the end, first and foremost, a journey of figuring out who you are and what you want to do, and then you'll create the best work you can. And that, there's no right and wrong. It can be, you can want to aim for $1 billion business, but you better be the type for it.
Okay, and on that note, I think we are just about out of time with episode number 112 of CXOTalk.
This was a lot of fun. I hope I said some things that were helpful to people.
Listen, we got more questions in this 45 minutes than maybe 4 shows combined. So thank you for helping experiment with us, Alex. It was unbelievable amount of insights that you shared with us in the last 45 minutes.
It was a real pleasure and honor to be with you guys.
Well, we hope that you'll come back. You have been watching a special edition of CXOTalk, and we have been speaking with Alex Osterwalder, who is a noted author, founder of a company called Strategyzer, and generally acknowledged as the business model and value proposition king of the world.
The king of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? Why not?
I love that. I agree.
I'm Michael Krigsman. My fabulous co-host is Vala Afshar. And Vala, I hope the rest
of CXOTalk.
The Prince of CXOTalk. Here we go. The King of CXOTalk. And on Friday, we are talking with Mark Schwartz, who is CIO in the federal government. And I hope that everybody will come back and join us on Friday.
That's tomorrow.
Which is tomorrow, as it always is. Alex, thank you so much. And everybody, thanks for watching. And we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.